He sold everything for a better life abroad, only to realize it was all a scam. My wonderful friends, welcome to another exciting movie journey with us. Get ready as we bring you the full gist about this popular Nigerian movie filled with morals and hidden lessons. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe because we have plenty of exciting movie goodies coming your way. So, grab your popcorn and let's roll. On a cool night, Linus woke up from a dream where he was searching for his passport to give to his agent in charge of his travel plans. As he woke up, he immediately started looking for the passport, waking his girlfriend, Chioma, in the process. When Chioma asked him what he was looking for, he threatened her, saying, "God help you if I don't find my passport." He then called her Jezebel, leaving Chioma dumbfounded. Linus went to the sitting room to continue his search. Chioma followed him to assist, but Linus warned her to stay away because she didn't support his decision to travel abroad. Eventually, he found the passport under the rug in the sitting room, sighed in relief, and returned to his room. The next morning, Linus was in his bedroom, fully dressed and ready to go out, when he received a credit alert. His excitement knew no bounds as he rushed downstairs to share the good news with Chioma. However, she remained cold toward him. Sensing her mood, Linus asked what was wrong. Chioma told him she was hurt because he had called her Jezebel. Realizing his mistake, Linus apologized. Chioma tried to convince him not to travel abroad, reminding him that his business was already doing well. She had even helped him find reliable suppliers who could boost their business further. She reasoned that if they worked together, Linus could make the money he was seeking abroad right here in their country. But Linus, blinded by his desire to leave, refused to listen. Determined, he informed Chioma that he was going to see his pastor for prayers regarding his travel plans. Later that day, Linus visited his pastor. While praying for him, the pastor requested Linus to hand over his passport so he could take it to the mountaintop for prayers. Linus became apprehensive, clutching his passport tightly as if he didn't trust the pastor. The pastor then instructed him to kneel for prayers. Linus obeyed, but discreetly hid his passport under his clothes. When Linus returned home, Chioma was nowhere to be found in the sitting room. He quickly hid his passport inside one of the cushions before heading to the kitchen to see her. Noticing her mood, he asked what was wrong. Chioma explained that one of their major suppliers had refused to do business with them anymore after hearing about Linus's travel plans. She then asked if he had told anyone about his intentions. Linus replied that he had only shared the news with 3 people. From this, Chioma figured out how the supplier must have heard. Hearing this, Linus became upset and started insulting the supplier. To lighten Chioma's mood, Linus told her he would take her to her favorite restaurant for dinner. An hour later, Linus was fully dressed, waiting downstairs for Chioma when he received a call from his sister, Vivian. She informed him about a woman she met online, a Canadian citizen who could help with his travel plans if he agreed to marry her. Linus dismissed it as a scam, warning Vivian not to trust people online. However, Vivian persisted, trying to convince him. Since Linus was desperate to leave the country, he seemed to consider it before ending the call. When Chioma finally came downstairs, Linus complimented her beauty with sweet words, and they left the house. What would you do if you were in Chioma's shoes? Would you keep trying to convince Linus, or would you let him go? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometime later, Linus and Chioma arrived at the restaurant and placed their order with the waitress. Shortly after, the waitress returned and apologized, informing them that someone had booked the entire restaurant for himself and a woman. She politely asked Linus and Chioma to leave. As the waitress was speaking, the man who had reserved the restaurant walked in and asked what was going on. The waitress explained that Linus and Chioma were about to leave. Linus immediately recognized the man and introduced himself. The man then remembered Linus, as they had worked together in the past. After exchanging pleasantries, the man still insisted that Linus and Chioma leave. This alone bruised Linus's ego and embarrassed Chioma. So she quickly took Linus's hand, and they left the restaurant. On their way home, Linus kept brooding over what had happened. Chioma tried to console him, telling him to forget about it, but instead, Linus blamed her. He argued that if she had allowed him to travel abroad, no one would have trampled on his ego like that. Frustrated, he even threatened to hit her, but Chioma quickly bit him in self-defense. Back at home, Chioma entered the room first, while Linus continued ranting about their argument inside the Uber. Moments later, Linus stormed into the room, furious, as he had just received news that his agent had canceled his embassy interview. It was a huge disappointment for him. That same night, out of desperation, Linus suddenly remembered God and began praying, asking for mercy so he could travel abroad. Chioma watched him in amazement. The next day, Linus told Chioma that she had hurt him badly by biting him, and he needed her to know how he felt. Chioma apologized, and they reconciled. Once again, Chioma calmly suggested that Linus could still achieve success in their country instead of traveling abroad. However, Linus remained adamant, believing that he could only attain massive wealth overseas. Eventually, Chioma surrendered and gave him her full support to travel. This made Linus the happiest man. A few days later, Linus returned home looking disappointed. When Chioma asked what was wrong, he revealed that his visa application had been denied. Chioma felt sorry for him and encouraged him to reapply. While she was still talking, Vivian suddenly burst into the house with excitement, eager to know if Linus's visa had been approved. When Linus remained silent, Chioma broke the news that his visa had been denied. Vivian's excitement quickly turned into disappointment. However, Chioma, being the supportive girlfriend that she was, reassured her that Linus could reapply, and this time they would ensure everything was done correctly. Vivian, however, was not convinced. She accused Chioma of pretending and insisted that she never wanted Linus to travel in the first place. Later that day, while Chioma was cooking, Vivian walked into the kitchen. Chioma politely told her that the food was ready and that she could serve herself. Instead of responding, Vivian eyed Chioma up and down, hissed, and walked away. Chioma was amazed but chose to remain silent and continued cleaning. Later, Vivian went to Linus's room and invited him to eat, but he refused. She then blamed Chioma for his visa denial, but Linus sternly warned her not to involve Chioma. Still, Vivian refused to back down. Determined, Vivian reminded Linus about the Canadian woman she had told him about and urged him to consider marrying her as an alternative way to travel abroad. An hour later, Chioma was enjoying a TV show when Vivian walked in, grabbed the remote, and changed the channel without saying a word. Frustrated, Chioma let out an outburst, demanding to know why Vivian did that. Vivian ignored her, forcing Chioma to get up and leave the sitting room. What do you think about Vivian's behavior? Is she genuinely looking out for Linus, or does she have another motive? Let's discuss in the comments. Later that night, Vivian was on a call with the Canadian lady, Mirabelle. She then handed the phone to Linus so he could speak with her. Just as Linus was talking, Chioma walked into the room. Vivian quickly took the phone back from Linus, and as she was leaving, loudly called Mirabelle "our wife" for Chioma to hear. Chioma immediately asked Linus what was going on, but Linus pretended it was nothing and told her not to pay attention to Vivian. However, Chioma wasn't fooled. She knew something was happening. After everything that had happened that day, Chioma took a shower, changed into her nightwear, and stepped out of the bathroom, only to find Vivian lying on the bed she shared with Linus. Surprised, she asked Vivian what she was doing in their room. Vivian boldly responded that since Chioma wasn't married to Linus, she had no right to claim anything in the house. This led to a heated argument, which quickly turned into a physical fight. Linus had to step in to separate them. Vivian then dragged out Chioma's luggage, insisting she should leave. Instead of standing up for Chioma, Linus begged her to step out of the room. Chioma, without hesitation, did so. Once she was gone, Linus and Vivian laughed together because they had planned it all along. Linus wasn't man enough to send Chioma out himself, so Vivian had taken it upon herself to do it. Chioma, feeling frustrated, went to the sitting room, still in disbelief at Linus and Vivian's behavior. She couldn't understand the kind of mentality they had. The next morning, Linus was busy watching a football match when Vivian walked in and excitedly informed him that Mirabelle was in the country. Linus immediately shifted his focus from the game to Vivian. She then told him that he must do everything possible to make Mirabelle like him so they could get married. But Linus hesitated. He didn't want to hurt Chioma. Vivian, however, pressured him to forget about Chioma and focus on his future abroad. The following day, Chioma returned home from an outing and noticed that the gate had a different lock. She called Linus to ask if he had changed it, but he denied it. Just then, Vivian appeared and opened the gate, making it clear that she was the one who had replaced the lock. Chioma walked into the house and saw her bags placed at the entrance. She immediately confronted Vivian, asking why her belongings were outside. Vivian coldly replied that since Chioma wasn't married to Linus, she had no reason to keep her things in his room, then walked away. Later that day, Chioma confronted Linus, telling him that if he wanted to end the relationship, he should have done it himself, instead of using Vivian to do it for him. Linus tried to defend himself, but Chioma cut him off, warning him not to act innocent. Before leaving the room, she told him, "We'll see who has the last laugh." That same evening, Vivian received a call from Mirabel, who was in the neighborhood and wanted Linus's address. Shocked but excited, Vivian quickly gave her the directions. She then ran to tell Linus that Mirabel was on her way. A few minutes later, Mirabel arrived at Linus's gate. Vivian and Linus rushed to welcome her. Chioma, curious about the commotion, stepped outside to observe. Mirabel then asked who Chioma was. To Chioma's shock, Linus lied, saying she was just Vivian's friend. Heartbroken, Chioma quietly walked back inside the house. In her room, Chioma couldn't believe that Linus had denied their relationship so easily, just to gain something from Mirabel. Realizing she had no place in his life anymore, she decided to pack her things and leave for good. Meanwhile, Mirabel and Vivian were chatting in the room. Mirabel even gifted Vivian some clothes, which she excitedly accepted. As Chioma prepared to leave, Linus suddenly begged her not to go, insisting that everything he was doing was for both of them. But Chioma had made up her mind. She was done. Without looking back, she walked out of his house forever. Linus was left heartbroken, unable to believe that Chioma had truly left him. What do you think? Did Linus make the right choice by prioritizing his dreams of traveling abroad over his relationship with Chioma, or did he let go of something valuable? Let's discuss. Vivian went to meet Linus, and he told her that Chioma had left him. Vivian was overjoyed, thinking that God had answered her prayers. She then urged Linus to go spend time with Mirabel. When Linus entered the room and started chatting with Mirabel to get to know her better, she requested a particular food he had never heard of. Confused, he went to Vivian, who was busy in the kitchen, and asked her to find out what Mirabel wanted. Vivian went to ask Mirabel, but became even more confused than Linus. She quickly checked the internet to understand what Mirabel was talking about. Once they figured it out, Linus told Vivian to go get it for Mirabel. An hour later, Vivian returned with the snack, and they all sat at the dining table, chatting. However, as Mirabel started asking Linus some questions, he gave answers that didn't make much sense. Vivian, who knew he was lying, struggled to contain her reaction. Later that day, Vivian confronted Linus, telling him she was disappointed in him for lying to Mirabel. She also suspected that Mirabel knew they weren't being truthful. That night, Linus spent time with Mirabel while Vivian eavesdropped. As she listened, she smiled, feeling proud of Linus. The next morning, Mirabel surprised Vivian by preparing breakfast. When Linus walked into the kitchen and saw Mirabel cooking, he felt proud. Both he and Vivian believed they were smart, unaware that something unexpected was about to happen. Later that day, Chioma barged into the house, demanding the money she had used to buy goods for Linus. This led to a fight between Chioma and Vivian, but Linus quickly intervened and chased Chioma out of the house. After Chioma left, Mirabel was unhappy about the fight. She told Linus and Vivian that it was time for them to leave the country and follow her to Canada. Hearing this, Linus and Vivian were overjoyed. The next morning, Linus and Mirabel went out for a jog. Later in the day, Linus was playing Ludo with Vivian when Mirabel suddenly stood up and ran to vomit. When she returned, she told Linus that she was pregnant. They all rejoiced at the good news. A few days later, while Linus was massaging Mirabel's legs, she told him that she needed money to help process his visa documents. She claimed her credit card had stopped working and that she needed about 7 million naira to sort everything out. Linus immediately stopped what he was doing and fell silent. Something about Mirabel's request seemed suspicious, but he chose to see what would happen next. Linus later told Vivian about Mirabel's request. Desperate to see Linus travel abroad, Vivian urged him to find a way to raise the money instead of questioning the situation. The next day, Vivian called a friend, informing her that she wanted to sell all her human hair. Meanwhile, Linus contacted a friend to sell his piece of land for 2.5 million naira. He also sold his TV and fridge, all in the name of traveling abroad. A few days later, Mirabel was shocked to learn that Linus and Vivian had sold their belongings just to raise money for his visa application. She reassured Linus that he would get his money back in no time once he arrived in Canada. She then began talking about how Canada was full of great opportunities. A few days later, Linus and Mirabel had a court wedding. Do you think Linus and Vivian made a wise decision by selling everything for the chance to go abroad? Or are they walking into a trap? A week later, Chioma went to withdraw money from a POS stand when she was surprised to see that the attendant was someone she knew. His name was Chris. Chioma asked him how he ended up working as a POS attendant. Chris then shared his story, explaining how he was duped by a woman who had promised to take him to Canada. Chioma asked if he had a picture of the woman, and when Chris showed her, she immediately recognized the lady as Mirabel, who was staying at Linus's house. Meanwhile, Mirabel was preparing to leave for the airport that same day. When Linus offered to see her off, she quickly made up a story about having meetings to attend before heading to the airport. As soon as Mirabel left, Chioma and Chris rushed to Linus and Vivian's house to warn them that Mirabel was a fraudster. At first, they didn't believe them until Chris showed Linus Mirabel's picture and shared how she had also scammed him. That was when Linus realized the truth and started blaming Vivian for putting him in such a predicament. While Mirabel was in transit, she smiled to herself, thinking she had successfully pulled off another scam, unaware that she was about to meet her downfall. Instead of heading to the airport, she instructed the driver to take her to a bus park. Suddenly, the driver noticed his phone was missing. Thinking he had left it at Linus's house, he asked Mirabel if they could go back to retrieve it. At that moment, Linus and Vivian were already distressed at home, trying to call Mirabel, but she wasn't picking up. Just then, the driver arrived at the house to retrieve his phone. When they asked him about Mirabel's whereabouts, he casually mentioned that she was still in the car. Linus and Vivian immediately rushed outside. The moment Mirabel saw them, she panicked and took off running. However, they chased her down and caught her, giving her the beating of her life. It was then that she finally confessed that she was never based abroad. The driver stood watching as everything unfolded. A few days later, Linus called Chioma for a meeting, and she came along with Chris. Linus sincerely apologized for not listening to her and for treating her badly. He then begged her to come back to him. However, Chioma told him that she had moved on with Chris. Right then and there, Linus realized he had lost a good woman. The moral lesson of this movie is that desperation can lead people to make unwise decisions, and sometimes what seems like a great opportunity could actually be a trap. It is important to be patient, trust your instincts, and never ignore red flags. And that's it, guys. Thank you for joining us in this exciting episode. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification bell for more interesting and fascinating episodes like this. Till we meet again, goodbye.